So you want to have fun? Well, you came to the wrong. Hi, my name is Tyler Russo. Welcome to Billion Dollar Clown Farm. Today we're going to be talking about memeless and you. Memeless, colloquially, it's a list you're playing to have a good time, to be a bit of a goofball, to get silly with it. You're trying to be a special snowflake weirdo and win with style and flex, or just lose. And those are both great. It doesn't matter what the result is necessarily. The more important thing is how you get there. This can arise because you are a nice person with normal interests who eventually arrives at a place where trying to kick your opponent's teeth in is no longer an enjoyable practice because you're like well adjusted and have other things going on in your life besides dominating other people in Warhammer. Or the other end of the horseshoe curve. You're just a bit of a freak who likes to flex on people or you're bored and crave more stimulus, which is me. Either way, you've arrived in a position where you want to run a meme list. There's a lot of ways you can do this, and it's changed a lot over time because the game is constantly evolving, but I feel like there's some core factors as a meme list appreciator that I feel are good to bear in mind or abide by. So the first thing is it's generally more fun from my experience to try and win a little bit. This is not necessarily because you like winning, otherwise you wouldn't just be running a meme list. More so like something that absolutely sucks, so it would be funny for one round, the first round of a tournament, then be kind of a bummer until maybe the last round of a tournament when you're playing someone who is also doing incredibly bad. But you also might just arrive at a place where like if you are slightly better at Warhammer than them and like beat them with like a bit of a joke, they might just like feel bad too. So I feel like just like running something that's like underdog shit can be hysterical, like if it's like the right thing. But I think it's like important to bear in mind that like maybe just trying to suck completely is not always the most enjoyable way to do it for you, but also very importantly for your opponent, because your opponent probably wants to play an actual game to some capacity instead of just guiltily tabling you. It might eventually just feel like the emotional equivalent of telling the same joke for 36 rounds / 10 to 20 hours. Sometimes you show up, speaking not from personal experience, here's an experience that happened to a friend where you show up to round 2 of a tournament and you have your squig off. Let's say that tournament is Nova 2023, just as a hypothetical example. And you tell your opponent that you're running a Stompa and a squig off, and they're just a very serious stone-faced dad from the Midwest, and then they're like, what does that do? And you can't tell them that it's really a joke, and they don't really understand the joke either, because you're just like in a situation where if you do, and then you like beat them, they'll probably just feel like weird, confused, and mad, and then like the alternative is like they stomp you and was like, that was bad, and then kind of move on with their life and forget about it. You can also just have a moment where like your opponent sees the list, chuckles, shakes their head and smiles, and then you're just playing an actual game like pretty quickly, unless there's like something mechanically about the army that's making it interesting. Sometimes just like the visual of something and then like starting a normal game after makes like all that go away. So I feel like the most successful meme lists are ones that like are mechanic driven as opposed to just visually this is like very funny. Not that there's in value in that, but like ideally like you have a little bit of both. You have to have the aesthetic comedy of like that's crazy looking, and then you also have to have something that like mechanically is like sort of interesting to engage with. These aren't hard truths. It's just Warhammer. Who cares? But you know, I feel like abiding by these to some extent generally helps more. Which brings us to Lords of War, which are usually the most fun in paper but have mixed results in practice. They can be extremely interactive one way or another, where you just like mercilessly destroy your opponent because they have no way to kill your, again as a hypothetical, 2 Stompas. And then like it doesn't mean like you shouldn't do this. It's still often worth bringing because like visually it's very cool for both players, but things like terrain, strange rulings on engagement range, like this happened to me at LVO where like somebody's Lord of Skulls was like sticking his arm over the edge of a ruin in order to get engagement into a unit that they normally wouldn't be able to charge into. For anyone who's like not super familiar with like more modern 40k, how this works is like you can engage models in close combat vertically. So like if you're 5 inches above something, you can fight something that's below you and vice versa. So like this is a rule that's typically designed for like some guys are like in the first floor of a building and then they want to fight guys who are like up here, and they can fight them this way without having to climb all the way up because that can make like combat pretty impossible to engage in sometimes. We like had to have like a judge come over to see if like these hands sticking out of the Lord of Skull over my guys 5 inches was like something that could trigger engagement range. And my opponent was running 3 Lords of Skulls and was a nice enough guy, but I think by this point he just like really wanted to win. He is like a competitive player at his heart, and then like it arrived in a scenario where it was like kind of a big deal if that could happen or not, and then the judge was like very confused too. This is like just the kind of thing that happens if you bring like models without bases or that are just like very unconventional. Like my Squiggoth is a great example of that. Like pivoting him can be like really important sometimes, or like can he charge with his tusks or not? And these are things you should like define before the game. So I think sometimes just taking like your big ass dumbass thing can be more complicated than it seems at first. You could just be like an incredibly nice person and just always rule in like your opponent's favor, but they might feel weird about this too, because I generally don't want to just be handed like a free win either. And I think it's worth like trying to figure out the terrain situation in advance before you bring your big ass sort of war, because like another example of this is like I went to an event at a local store recently that had a terrain set up so that it was really hard for like a Lord of War to move around, because they wanted to make like these very like beautiful narrative boards. If I were to bring a Stompa or a Squiggoth to that, it probably would have made like the layout more complicated for them, and we would have had to like remove a lot of the terrain before the round started, which like, you know, just disrupts the game. And then the other thing that could happen is that you are just like stuck with whatever terrain is there, and then it's going to be really hard for you to like actually functionally play a game. So yeah, they're still great. I think like I chose a monolith for the background image, but I think a monolith is like actually a model that's kind of fine with this, because like it is just like a thing with like a fairly defined footprint. Weirder things are for sure like Hierophant Biotitan or like Mr. Squiggoth back there. The Lord of Skulls is like a monstrous model, but for like Lords of War, it's still like kind of not super big. So anyways, those are some examples though. Don't get too weird about it. Prefacing, this is a meme list too many times, and beating someone will feel incredibly bad for them. It's still fine to acknowledge that you're running something like kind of weird. It's usually pretty self-evident, but like I think you can say like I'm bringing something like very strange and like this is a funny army to me, but don't say like it's utter dog shit or bad unless you like truly really know it. I've like maybe this isn't a factor for other people, but I've done this before where I've like run something that like I thought was very bad and then like communicated that to my opponent, and maybe like they didn't respect it as much as like they should have, or they're just like new or something, and then they get like crushed by it, and then you're embarrassed because like you set up false expectations. It's almost like you gotcha'd them in a way even though you weren't trying to, and then they're bummed because they lost to like the big dumb thing and everyone makes fun of them. So it's like you should still like present it like it's like a real thing your opponent has to play against generally, unless it's like just like literal garbage that can beat no one, and that's like fine as long as you're committing to going like 06 or 03 or whatever. But if it's something that has like a chance of winning, I feel like not trying to like preemptively salt the wound by saying like this is dog shit over and over again. This is like not a good thing to do. Maybe this is me just trying to give advice to my former self, but if you are someone who might end up in a situation, I feel like this is like a good thing to be wary of. Narrative is cool. If you're trying to decide on something to do, I think just like sticking to like finding like a thing that's like interesting narratively and committing to it is a pretty good idea. Unconventional things that are still semi-real is generally fun for everyone. So like examples of like meme narrative lists to me are like presently like Dreadmob is a great one. The Orc like Cult of Speed detachment is really good too. I think like the new Nightlord detachment can produce some like really cool narrative stuff for Chaos Space Marines. Kroot for Tau is an awesome one. The Kroot detachment I think like has some like legit play, but going like all Kroot to my current understanding is like probably not the most optimal thing you can do in Tal, even if it's like a pretty good thing and definitely not bad. Like the middle spot is generally more fun, I think, than like committing to something like incredibly bad. And then also if you're doing stuff like this, people in your area might start just like copying you in a good way, where like if they're like Tyler always shows up with his like dumb, I don't actually do this that often, but say I did, Tyler always shows up with his dumb wacky lists, like it's so cool and inspiring, I want to be like that too. Grassroots, you might just get everyone else around you to get more into that side of the game too, if it's something that excites you. And if you do it in a way that seems like cool and interesting and not you just getting your teeth kicked in every weekend, it's like more likely other people will start to like get excited about like goofy narrative stuff too. Having some sort of plan still helps. Just like building any list, what is this army trying to do? Is it just trying to be thematic, look cool? Does it have like any game utility in a way that makes it more fun than playing a couple times? What are its like strengths and weaknesses? It will like surely have something, even if the weaknesses greatly outnumber the strengths. Like there's probably still something in there. And then like how do you support that in a way to make the game more interesting? And then like we're not necessarily optimizing for winning. We're like, if you're approaching a meme list, you're trying to optimize for like a more interesting game experience, because your opponent took out like 3 hours of their day or whatever to like sit here and hang out with you. So you should try to give them an experience that's like interesting for them in some capacity too, ideally. I also feel like trying weird things chance creates like very unexpected results sometimes. Like I took 2 Stompas to a tournament last weekend and it was a blast, and boy, those guys fuck. I like did not think they were going to be that good. I started to do the this is a meme list, don't worry about this thing. I've been like quickly backpedaled. My first round I like sort of implied that but didn't rub it in, like still tried to present it as like a real thing my opponent had to play against. I'm very happy I did because it ended up going like incredibly well for me, and I tabled him kind of fast, and like there was like not that much you could do about it either. It was just like a bad matchup for him, and the 2 Stompas are a lot more powerful than I thought they were gonna be. And they're kind of just like a casino that like wins hard or loses hard, but still has like more like interesting gameplay than I thought they would. Like I had a very close game 2, which was unexpected. I thought I was gonna lose that like 1,000%. I managed to make it like a bit of an actual game for my opponent, which was cool to see. And then game 3, I would say like I had like a pretty real game against Tau too. Or like the Stompas were gradually whittled down and then eventually died instead of just getting like blown out of the water completely or losing none of them throughout the game. So I'll go over that just to give like a specific example and because I'm excited to talk about it, and then like, some other kinds of meme lists and maybe general theory after. Here's some footage of double Stompa weekend. This is from my first round. I got to go first. The Stompas peered around the corner and mercilessly destroyed the Lanerator very easily. It was the main threat to them that my opponent had, and once it was destroyed, the game was kind of over quickly. The main reason I brought this list is because I had won a Stompa there from a previous tournament, with the caveat that I would paint it in their color scheme, and I thought this would be a fun excuse to bring him. This is another really good reason to bring a meme list. It's something that you think will be cool to paint and work on from a hobby perspective, and then the tournament is just an excuse to play with it and do something, and it's sort of a celebration of your progress painting it. I did this mostly because I thought it would be cool to own an additional Stompa, but now that I know that they fuck, I want to run them because they're sick to play with and can table CSM in 2 turns under the right circumstances, which is not so. Historically, I found that running things I think are really cool to paint but think will suck results in me realizing that they're actually very, very good or funny or interesting to play with in some unexpected capacity. This isn't always true, obviously. Sometimes you think something's bad and then it just turns out it actually is bad, but it's nice that it can surprise you. And if you really like a model, I feel like it's worth giving it a shot. So my prediction going into the event was that I would lose the first 2 rounds and then win the third one by a lot because Stompas are a stack check army that on paper to me seemed like it would be really extreme one way or the other. As someone who's played Lord of the Wars a lot, it's usually how it goes. But my first game was the only one that felt incredibly one-sided. The other 2 felt like they're real games that either player could win basically all the way through. My second game was against a list which is often referred to as Wolf Jail. I think unaffectionately, but I like playing against it. It's like 18 or so Thunderwolf Cavalry and a bunch of Wolfen. If anyone wants to play double Stompa, I feel like it's almost never worth double overcharging it, and it's almost never worth shooting all the little side guns, even if you're only wounding yourself on ones. And I feel like this game kind of came down to my Stompa dealing 9 wounds to himself on the preceding turn, and then getting dealt exactly enough wounds basically to kill him by the last Thunderwolf Cavalry squad. If my opponent's Thunderwolves didn't kill him there, my opponent and I agreed that like I would probably just win, which is awesome because we played like an actual game against 2 Stompas, which is not what I thought was going to happen. He didn't know who was going to win. I didn't know until basically the end of the game. That stated, in both that game and the last one I had against Tau, there were a number of confusing situations where I couldn't tell if the Stompas were able to move somewhere or not, and my opponent usually couldn't either. We're able to like work it out pretty easily in both games, but I can see something weird happening at a GT against like the wrong opponent, and I think it's still just like a fundamental issue of Lords of War that don't have bases. You just have to hope that your opponents are chill, and if they're not, you have to accept that could just make you lose a game that would have probably gone fine for you otherwise. Other issues like do you measure 5-inch vertical engagement from the Stompa's gun going down and such came up too. But this is when RTT where no one cared, so it wasn't a real issue. Just other caveats I want to express about playing them in case you want to too. This weekend I'm going to play my Speed Mob army, which is less of a meme, but I think also maybe worse than double Stompas were. We'll see. I was wrong last time. I might be wrong again. I played these when freebooters were a universally acknowledged terror, and before that when everyone thought they were bad, but they were actually still a terror in 9th edition, and they've been sitting on the shelf for a long time, so I'm excited to actually see them on the table again. But I'm having a good time playing stuff that's different. The data slate was a little bit of a bummer, but I think it's a good excuse to play all the sort of B tier orc units and just see if anything's more enjoyable. And above all else, I'm more interested in like doing art and hobby projects right now. So I'm using this off-meta grind time to get better at ZBrush and also touch up a lot of the boys in like my Green Tide army. And I'm going to do a video on army restoration soon about them. If you'd like to win a boy, the next Patreon raffle is going to be a couple orc boys that I'll be sending out. I don't know when, but I think like by mid-July, if not late July, so soon. Subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to win an orc boy, but more on that later. Either Either way, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.